Holloway house on Maple Street had always been a symphony of organized chaos. But that Tuesday morning, the silence hit me like a physical thing. I'm Elias Vance, and I've been writing the Willow Creek Chronicles for the local paper for 20 years. You get to know the rhythm of the town, the pulse of its families. And the Holloways, Mark, Sarah, and their 10-year-old June, they had a loud, happy beat. I drove by that morning to grab a shot of their yard sale leftovers for the human interest column. Saturday's event had been a huge success, a bustling swarm of bargain hunters. Mark, usually reserved, had been sweating through his polo shirt, haggling over a lawnmower. Sarah, the artist, was selling off her less-loved canvases with a serene, almost detached smile. And June, all big eyes and red pigtails, was meticulously labeling the price tags on her old stuffed animals. But now the lawn was pristine, not just tidy, but unnaturally empty. There wasn't a single battered coffee table, chipped vase, or forgotten tricycle. The only thing left was the handmade sign, staked into the grass. Garage sale. Everything must go. Now it just looked prophetic. I pulled over. I felt that tiny cold prickle on the back of my neck that I only ever got when a story was turning from charming local color into something else entirely. Something wrong. I walked up the short path. The front door was locked, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the kitchen window. It was closed but not latched, and through the slight gap, I could see the table. 3 places were set to you adult mugs, 1 child's plastic cup with a cartoon unicorn, and a box of Cheerios sitting next to a half-filled milk carton. This wasn't a family who had driven off for a spontaneous holiday. This was a family who had planned breakfast and simply failed to show up for it. I knocked. A hard, professional knock. No answer. I tried again, calling Mark's name. Nothing. I walked around the back, pushing through the overgrown rosebush that Sarah had always promised to prune. The back porch was where the last items of the sale had been stacked. And there, against the glass sliding door, was the only remaining evidence of their life. A small, antique wooden sign, hand-painted by Sarah in elegant script. It read, "A clean slate is a work of art." Mark Holloway's Cara practical, sensible sedan was gone from the garage, which confirmed they had driven somewhere. But their suitcases, usually stored right by the back stairs, were still there, stacked neatly and dusty. The garage sale money, counted and bound in neat stacks, was sitting in a heavy ceramic cookie jar on the counter. Tens of thousands of dollars. People don't leave for a new life without their getaway money. That's when I called the sheriff, Frank Daly, and the story of the Holloways officially became a mystery. It was the perfect silence after a week of perfect noise. The most curious part of the whole thing wasn't what was missing, but what was left behind. Sheriff Daly grumbled, but he went through the motions. He knew, just like I did, that people just don't vanish from Willow Creek. Not completely. No forced entry, Elias. No blood. No signs of struggle, Frank muttered, holding June's unicorn cup like it was evidence in a bank robbery. Just vacancy. I told him about the breakfast, the sign, the untouched cash. Frank focused on the practical details, phone records, credit card activity. But those avenues went nowhere. Their phones had been left charging in the master bedroom. Their credit cards hadn't been swiped anywhere in the country since the day before the sale. It was like they had stepped out of their door and into a time out of bounds. I started talking to the neighbors, the real heart of the town's knowledge. The first was Mrs. Gable, a woman whose lace curtains and sharp eyes missed nothing. She lived directly across the street. They were tired. Elias, very tired, Mrs. Gable said, pouring me a cup of tea that tasted faintly of disappointment. Especially Mark. He was like a taut wire all week. But Sarah? She was floating. She told me she felt lighter than air after I bought that hideous ceramic goose. Said she was shedding weight, literally and figuratively. The second witness was Tommy Rodriguez, a freckle-faced kid who looked about 13. He'd bought June's bicycle, a beat-up blue one with streamers, for $30. June gave me the bike, Mr. Vance, but she also gave me something else, Tommy said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. It was a crude drawing. It showed 3 stick figures, Mark, Sarah, and June holding hands, standing in front of a house, and then a thick black line running vertically down the middle of the page. On the other side of the line, the same 3 stick figures were drawn. But this time, they were wearing crowns and standing next to a small boat on a wavy sea. The caption, scrawled in a child's shaky hand, read, "Leaving the Kingdom." That drawing stuck with me. It was too imaginative for a simple holiday, but too detailed for just a doodle. I went back to the house, getting permission from Frank to poke around June's room. The room was colorful, filled with books, but the desk was the key. There was a journal open, not a diary, but a book of drawings and stories. On the last page was the story of the Great Shedding. It described a king and queen who lived in a castle made of heavy, burdensome things, debts, obligations, and lies. To become truly free and sail to the Crown Islands, they had to sell everything they owned to the commoners. The very last item they had to sell was the clock of truth, because as long as it ticked, they were bound to their past time. Once the clock was gone, they could change their clothes and names and walk away, invisible to the kingdom they had left behind. I realized then that the garage sale wasn't a liquidation. It was a ritual. They weren't moving, they were erasing themselves. But where was the clock of truth? The last item sold. I checked the sheriff's evidence list. The list of items sold was massive, but 2 people confirmed what the last large purchase had been, a tall, antique grandfather clock that Mark had brought down from the attic hours before the sale ended. It wasn't ticking, it was ornamental. A tall, dark piece of wood. The buyer was an out-of-towner, a woman who only paid cash and only left an address. The old Grist Mill Road, a location 20 miles outside of Willow Creek, near the county line, known mostly for its abandoned buildings and junkyards. Mrs. Gable remembered the buyer clearly, a slight woman in a wide-brimmed hat, driving an unmarked white van. This was the lead. This was the point of divergence. This person wasn't a bargain hunter. She was part of the plan. I sat at my desk in the empty Chronicle office, the grandfather clock ticking loudly mine, not theirs. It was 10 p.m. I had wasted precious time trying to track the buyer through the DMV, but the plate number Mrs. Gable recalled came back to a fictitious shell company. The police were focused on official channels, Amber Alerts, bank fraud, missing persons reports. I knew they were looking in the wrong direction. The Holloways didn't want to be found. They had paid to disappear. I looked at June's drawing again. The Crown Islands. They hadn't used their credit cards because they were still in the area, or at least they were moving via cash and anonymous Mensa train, a bus, maybe even that white van. The Clock of Truth buyer was the only link to the escape route. The buyer was the one who was supposed to clean up the last loose end. I slammed my hand down. The old Grist Mill Road. It wasn't an address. It was a drop point. The Holloways must have shed their identity, their possessions, and their money right there. The buyer took the clock as payment for the service, and the Holloways took the escape. But if the buyer was a professional, why give a real address, even an old, remote one? Then it hit me. The address wasn't for the buyer. It was a final, cryptic signal from Mark to Sarah, or vice versa, in case something went wrong, or maybe just a designated place for a final rendezvous. I realized I couldn't wait for Frank to get a search warrant for an abandoned lot. I had to go now. If the Holloways were changing clothes and getting into that escape vehicle, they would be long gone by morning. If they were there, waiting for the final pickup, I had one last chance to catch the tail end of their beautiful, desperate vanishing act. I grabbed my jacket and my camera, always the camera, and headed out the door. The only car that wasn't gone was Mark's sedan, which the police still had in their impound lot. That meant they left with nothing. My mind raced. Mark had been the high-strung one. He was the one who needed the clean slate. He must have been running from something far older than his house and job. The sale, the shedding, it was his penance. But Sarah and June, they went willingly. That's what made the whole thing so unsettlingly romantic. They weren't kidnapped. They were liberated by a man who loved them enough to give them a new life, even if it meant destroying the old one. The drive was 20 minutes of dusty gravel and dark woods. As I pulled my beat-up truck onto the old grist mill road, the moon was high. It illuminated a few rusted-out silos and one large skeletal warehouse, the grist mill itself. And sitting beside the crumbling mill, its engine idling quietly, was an unmarked white van, the buyer's van. I killed my engine, heart hammering, and took the biggest breath of my life. This was no longer reporting. This was interception. I had to know the truth before it drove away forever. I stepped out of my truck, the gravel crunching loud enough to wake the dead. I approached the van slowly, my camera hanging heavy on my chest. I didn't see anyone near the van, but the driver's side door was slightly ajar, a soft interior light glowing. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice was rough. A figure emerged from the shadows of the old mill. It wasn't the woman in the wide-brimmed hat. It was Sarah Holloway. She looked exactly like she had at the garage sales arena, almost translucent, but she was wearing simple dark traveling clothes. "Elias, I knew you'd be the one to figure it out," she said, her voice a low, peaceful murmur. I stopped 10 feet away. "Sarah, where is Mark? Where is June? The police are looking for you, for a kidnapping." She laughed, a small, sad sound. "No kidnapping, Elias. Only a rescue. Mark is finishing up. June is asleep." She nodded toward a small, beat-up travel trailer hitched to the back of the white van. It was the only thing on the property that looked cared for. "Tell me what happened, Sarah. Why the sale? Why the run?" She walked up to the edge of the mill, where a small fire was crackling in an oil drum. In the glow, I saw the truth etched on her face, relief, exhaustion, and steel. Mark wasn't just a financial advisor, Elias. 10 years ago, before we met, he got involved with people who used his accounting skills for less than legal means. They caught him, but he cooperated and got a deal. Witness protection, but he refused it. He wanted a normal life with me, so he changed his name and settled here in Willow Creek, and the old life was supposed to stay buried. She traced a circle on the ground with her toe, but 2 months ago, he got a letter. A quiet, nondescript letter saying his identity had been compromised. His associates, the ones he testified against, were getting out. They were coming for him. And us. The garage sale wasn't about funding a new life. It was about decommissioning the old one.